Hello everybody and welcome to Chapter 11. In Chapter 11 we're going to focus on personality disorders. So first we have to start by asking, what is a personality disorder? Personality disorders are persistent patterns of emotions, cognitions, and behaviors for the individual that may complicate and impair their relationships with others. It can cause individual level distress, or it can cause distress to the people around the person with this disorder. There are noteworthy differences in the prevalence of personality disorder types according to gender. So some of these are very gender specific. Even if they're gender specific, it does not mean that both genders can't be represented in the personality disorders. They can, but there are some disorders where males tend to dominate and other disorders where females tend to dominate. So men are more likely to suffer from personality disorders that exhibit aggression, assertive characteristics, or emotional detachment, whereas women are more likely to suffer from personality disorders that are submissive, emotional, insecure, things like that. And we'll go through and give examples in a bit. Just some basic statistics: about 10% of the population suffers from a personality disorder. Personality disorders have a very high comorbidity with each other. So a person may be diagnosed with one personality disorder and subsequently be diagnosed with multiple others. Personality disorders are broken up into what we call clusters, and there are 3 different clusters. The first is Cluster A, which are considered odd or eccentric disorders. Excuse me. The first is paranoid personality disorder. This is characterized by excessive distrust and suspicion of others, but without any justification for the distrust or suspicion. There's no apparent reason for malevolence on the other party, but the person with the personality disorders just assumes everybody's looking to harm them, everybody's out to get them at all times. They frequently perceive situations that have nothing to do with them as directly having to do with them, that they're sort of at the center of everything everybody does. Everything that happens is in some way meant to harm them. This makes relationships very, very difficult, not only for the person who has the personality disorder. They can't connect with other people because they're constantly assuming other people are doing something bad to them. But people in that person's life, it makes them hard to maintain a relationship as well. So imagine being a family member, a friend, or a spouse or intimate partner of somebody with this personality disorder. It's going to be very difficult to connect if they're constantly accusing you or of trying to harm them or scheming against them or thinking that you're planning to do something to them. Treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy with a specific focus on trying to retrain their thinking about the motivation of other people. So they go in and try and reset the thought process that people are not trying to hurt you, people aren't scheming, you're not central to everything that happens in everybody's life. People are just going about their lives, right? However, there's a low success rate of treating this personality disorder. And I would say in general, there's a fairly low success rate of treating most personality disorders. They're what we call fixed, meaning that if you have it, if it's been identified, it is likely to be there and stay for the remainder of your life and be a problem. We do treat some with more success than others, but a lot of them we have very low success rates of treatment. The next in Cluster A is schizoid personality disorder. This is an extreme social detachment and a limited range of emotional response. People who have this are often described as cold, aloof, detached, indifferent, right? They lack interest in emotional attachments. They have no desire to make friends or to have intimate relationships. This includes sexual relationships. They have no desire for sexual engagement. And they often feel like they're looking at life from the outside looking in. They feel like they're sort of apart from the rest of everybody and they can't be a part of the rest of everybody, but they don't really want to be, right? They don't really want to be. Tends to be a precursor in childhood with excessive shyness. This doesn't mean that all children that are shy are going to end up with schizoid personality disorder. Lots of kids are shy when they're little and they outgrow it. But there is a demonstrated relationship between excessive shyness in childhood and developing this PD later in life. It is also very common among kids who have experienced child abuse or neglect. There's a common relationship between schizoid PD and having a history of child abuse in your lifetime. Treatment for this is social skills training. These people don't necessarily understand emotions or recognize them in others, so we train them how to socially engage since it didn't come naturally. This is how you have social exchanges with people. This is when people do this or talk to you or approach you, this is how you should respond. We train them to recognize what other people's emotions are and to respond in a socially appropriate capacity to their emotion. Despite the fact that they really, don't have any huge emotional range of their own and no huge desire to engage. But if they are seeking out therapy, obviously this isn't working for them, so these are the coping skills that we provide. The final cluster A is schizotypal personality disorder. This is a pattern of interpersonal deficits resulting in discomfort with close relationships. They have cognitive and perceptual distortions and often very eccentric and strange behaviors. They often engage in what's called magical thinking, okay? That they think that they have telepathy, or they think that they can see into the future, or they can read minds. They think that they have some special ability, that they're clairvoyant, that they have some special ability that just doesn't exist in nature, but they truly believe that it exists in them. This personality disorder is often viewed as a precursor to schizophrenia. Okay, so it's kind of like on the road to schizophrenia, that people who develop this personality disorder are very likely later in life to develop a full-blown diagnosis of full-blown schizophrenia. Treatment is often sought because these individuals experience a lot of anxiety and depression because they have that social detachment because of the oddness, the eccentric behaviors. Other people can't relate to them and they don't know how to relate. So they often go in to get treatment for anxiety or depression and subsequently get diagnosed with this personality disorder. This is treated pretty much with pharmacology. We treat this a lot like we treat depression, with different serotonin reuptake inhibitors and so forth. We treat it in a chemical capacity more so than a therapeutic or environmental capacity. Next, we're moving on to cluster B personality disorders, which is characterized by dramatic, emotional, or erratic behaviors. The first we're going to talk about is antisocial personality disorder. You probably are more familiar with the concept of sociopathy or psychopathy. Those are not clinical terms in the DSM, but it is what we closely relate antisocial personality disorder to. This is characterized by a pattern of extreme disregard for others. There are issues with impulsivity. And they lack the ability to empathize, sympathize, and emotionally relate to other people. It's often characterized by the fact that these individuals have no conscience. So they understand the difference between right and wrong. They just don't care about violating those social rules, mores, etc. They don't feel bad when they make somebody else feel bad. It just doesn't register. Often characterized by the fact that they are incredibly easily bored, right? Lying, stealing, cheating, and harming others is very par for the course, tends to come naturally, and they completely lack regret. There's no regret, there's no I feel bad, I feel whatever. Often there's a high rate of substance abuse, and that gets back to the high rate of boredom. For some reason, what we have found in the research is that people with antisocial PD, their brain waves tend to move slower than the rest of the population. We think that's what causes the extreme boredom, and that it requires greater levels of stimulation for them to not be bored, right? So they seek out very high stress, very high energy activities like ruining other people's lives. Often they are people who do extreme sports as well because they are seeking that stimulation through the adrenaline rush. Like I said, they have impulse control issues, which is what is a big identifier of them, that they oftentimes seem to be very in control, but eventually they'll slip because they can't control the impulses, and that's a way of identifying. The interesting thing about this is that people with antisocial personality disorder are absolutely fine with who they are. They do not experience distress. Since they don't care about what other people think, they don't have any distress at negative reactions. So they rarely seek treatment, and it's exceptionally difficult, if one should come into treatment, to change anything. There is a very, very, very low success rate, almost to the point of nil. So this is a very fixed personality disorder that's very troublesome, and unfortunately, the only thing you can really do with an antisocial personality disorder is cut them out of your life, because they become very destructive and abusive to the people around them. Next is borderline personality disorder. We actually treat this one with a fair amount of success. So it's characterized by low self-image, mood instability, unstable relationships, poor impulse control, a lack of control over emotions, and severe abandonment issues or fears. So here's where we get to the gender specificity. Borderline PD can happen in men, but it's exceptionally common in women. Women dominate the numbers vastly. Similarly, antisocial personality disorder is vastly dominated by men. It's not that there are not women with antisocial PD. There are, but they're just rare. Borderline PD is very, very dominated by women. These individuals tend to go from one emotional extreme to the other without provocation, without explanation, without warning, to the excess. They often feel distress at their circumstances, so they actively seek treatment because they desire that relationship and they have those fears of abandonment. They don't want people to leave. But often their symptomology is it ends up pushing people away because it's just too much. The high and low emotions that come and go without warning. It's just a lot. It's just a lot for people to take. Frequently, people with BPD self-mutilate, and they have a high rate of engaging in suicidal behaviors. Treatment is mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, and so we get back to treating with pharmaceuticals, and something called dialectical behavior therapy, which focuses on exposing that individual to stressors that trigger the symptomology of their personality disorder. So we identify the stressors that trigger those emotional, that really wild change in emotion that's really quick. Stressors that provoke suicidal thoughts, stressors that will result in poor impulse control. We teach them to recognize that, and we also teach emotional regulation, and the two together helps create coping mechanisms that often lowers suicide attempts, suicide rates, and results in a better living circumstance for people with BPD. Next is histrionic personality disorder. This is characterized by overly dramatic people. Now, we all know dramatic people, but these are ridiculously out of control, overly dramatic people, to the point that it appears that they're almost acting all the time rather than living, or simply responding to what's going on in the environment. They're putting on a performance all the time. This behavior or this personality disorder is characterized by excessive attention-seeking behavior and excessive emotionality. These individuals need to be the center of attention at all times. They are very vain, they are very self-centered, and they need constant reassurance. In addition, they often act seductively and sexually towards others in order to obtain attention. Again, this is a female-dominated personality disorder. In terms of treatment, there's not much, right? Treatment tends to focus or tries to focus their attention on the fact that the way that you behave or the symptomology of your personality disorder results in the destruction of interpersonal relationships. They also tend to be very manipulative, and they get short-term gains. So in therapy, we try to teach them that, yes, you'll get something really quickly if you manipulate, but you'll eventually destroy the relationship. So your long-term gains are disappearing. So instead of focusing on short-term gains through manipulation, let's focus on long-term gains maintaining relationships. But again, there's a low success rate. Histrionic PDs have a hard time with the concept of delayed gratification. So we also teach that concept that you don't get everything you want instantaneously. You have to wait sometimes. And we teach appropriate ways of negotiating their wants and needs. The final personality disorder in cluster B is narcissistic personality disorder. This is somebody with an exaggerated sense of self-importance. They are often so preoccupied with themselves that they lack compassion or empathy to everyone around them. They have very little sensitivity for people around them or what they're going through, because it's not about them, right? I mean, you might be going through a divorce or somebody just died, but that has nothing to do with me. Let's talk about me, right? It's all about them. They often have grandiose fantasies of greatness, even though their life is pretty mundane or irregular. They tend to think that they're extremely special relative to everybody else. And their emotions are often exaggerated. So when they get sad, they tend to cry and sob over things that don't warrant crying and sobbing. Or when they get angry, they fly off the handle and really freak out. And again, when it's not warranted. They often suffer. They often suffer from high rates of depression because the reality of their life does not match their grandiose expectations of their self-identity. They think they're special, they think they're superior, they're better, I'm different than everybody else, but the actual reality isn't matching your thought process, and so they suffer from depression. Treatment focuses on reducing those grandiose fantasies to pleasurable, attainable expectations for life, and minimizing the emotional oversensitivity. Narcissistic personality disorders are incredibly reactive and sensitive to criticism of any kind, so we teach them that criticism is a part of life, and it's how we grow, and it's how we develop, and you need to accept it rather than immediately reject it and be angry about it. And we also work on increasing empathy for others, so turning the focus away from yourself and understanding that there are people around you and they have wants, they have needs, they have troubles as well, and you need to be empathetic to that. Again, low success rate of treatment. The final cluster is cluster C, and this is fearful disorders or anxious disorders. And the first is avoidant personality disorder. This is characterized by low self-esteem, the extreme fear of rejection and anxiety. Not the fear of rejection. They often suffer from anxiety. But the interesting thing is they have a deep desire for social connection and social relationships, but the previous symptoms keep them from being able to engage with other people. So they have these symptoms, they want the relationship, they can't have the relationships because of the symptoms, and therefore they experience a lot of distress and social isolation. They often withdraw as a result of these symptoms. They just stay out of social life in general, which isn't good for anybody. So treatment is teaching social skills and behavioral modification. Next is dependent personality disorder. This is characterized by an individual's pervasive and intense need to be taken care of. And we're talking about adults here, not children. People who should be able to be independent, autonomous, and take care of themselves. This results in a very submissive and clingy personality. There is severe separation anxiety and abandonment issues. These are people who can't make simple decisions ever on their own. They need constant guidance, constant reassurance. Basic decision making has to be done for them by other people. I'm sure you can imagine that this is pretty stifling and overwhelming to the people in their lives, family members, friends, spouses, etc. It becomes really overwhelming and unpleasant, which drives relationships away. The treatment focuses on developing autonomy and independence, learning how to take care of yourself, learning how to stop looking to other people to take care of you for you. It is common, however, they seek out therapy. They're really good about seeking out therapy and treatment, but the problem is they often become dependent on their therapist. They tend to immediately latch on, and they replace the people in their life with the therapist as, tell me what to do, tell me how to do this, take care of me, I can't do this without you, which is often a big hazard of treating dependent personality disorder. So therapists have to make sure that they do not become dependent because then you're just feeding the symptomology. Next is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is not the same as obsessive compulsive disorder. This is a personality disorder, which is very distinct and different. This is characterized by an obsession with having to complete everything the right way. And the right way is however that individual defines it. There's not always a rhyme or reason to it, but it has to be done the correct way every single time. This results in a preoccupation with details that becomes debilitating, which is very similar to obsessive compulsive disorder. Their compulsions become debilitating. But here with this personality disorder, you're constantly focusing on that right way, and it gets in the way. You can't get anything else done because it's debilitating. It gets in the way of relationships, it gets in the way of work, and it keeps you stagnating. People have a hard time advancing through life because they're so focused on doing things the right way rather than accomplishing things successfully and moving on to something else. Like I said, thought to be distantly related to OCD, but these individuals are not plagued by the obsessions that plague people with OCD. So people with OCD constantly have that mental tension, that mental emotional tension where they're focusing, perseverating on something, and it rises, that tension continues to rise until they engage in a compulsion to relieve it, whereas here they don't have the obsessions, right? So that tension never builds. They just have that need for things to be done in a sort of ritualistic, correct capacity. Often this can be related to perfectionism, right? So people who are excessively perfectionistic tend to, or I should say people with obsessive compulsive personality disorder tend to be ridiculously perfectionistic to the point that they can't function, right? They can't function. They have to exercise extreme control over how things are done, and it becomes an occupying problem. The treatment is therapy that focuses on the fears of what happens if you don't engage in things the right way, what's going to happen. And largely the answer is nothing catastrophic, right? But people with this personality disorder tend to think that if they don't do everything the right way, it will become a very slippery slope. And if I don't do it the right way here, everything else is going to get screwed up and I'm going to be a gigantic failure, which produces anxiety, feelings of being out of control. So they try to attempt to control everything through those rituals and provide perfectionism. There's often fear of inadequacy, right? So in therapy, they focus on relaxation techniques and letting those rituals go. And that is it for personality disorders.